You let me know, no rush. It's cruel, eh? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we're live. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. And we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, which Ms. Smithers is going to do today.
Thank you, Dr. Cottle. So in preparing for today's presentation, so much of the capital budget resides in municipal infrastructure. And so much of our capital in municipal infrastructure is about changes we make to the landscape to serve our community well. And it really has made me think, and I don't quite know where it will all end, but I've been very mindful in going through the preparation for today's discussion that with capital in our community that serves our community, we alter land that the footsteps of many Indigenous people have marked this land for generations. And like I say, I don't know where that's going to go in my head, but I think it's important that I'm glad that I've taken the time to think about that and be mindful of it as we talk today. And I think going into the future too, that, you know, we live in an amazing, incredible community that does a lot of amazing, incredible things for many amazing, incredible people. And we do that on land that has been lived on and in by Indigenous people since time immemorial. So with that, in the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge and appreciate that I live, work, and play in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This land is the traditional territory and home of the Bearispaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki nations, collectively known as Stoney Nakoda. The Blackfoot Confederacy of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Region 3 Métis. And as we gather here in Treaty 7, we acknowledge that we are all treaty people. I commit to working to live in right relations and to advance truth and reconciliation. And I will do this by continuing to expand my own knowledge on diversity and inclusion and truth and reconciliation, and to take the time to pause and reflect in everyday acts and activities, and to grow in reflection of and consideration for Indigenous perspectives in my personal and professional life. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you for linking that to what we're spending the majority of the day talking about. It's very meaningful, so thank you. Okay, we need to approve the agenda for November 17th. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move that we approve the agenda for the November 17th Finance Committee. All those in favor? Okay, carried unanimously. So as Ms. Smithers just mentioned, today is Capital Day. And the capital budget is a lot of work, but particularly a lot of work for finance and for municipal infrastructure. So we're going to hear largely from those two departments today. Oh, go ahead, Robin.
Did I miss the minutes?
Oh, no, I missed the minutes. Thanks. We need to approve minutes. So we need to approve minutes from the November 8th and the November 10th Finance Committee meetings. Are there any changes to the minutes?
I missed those. Where did they go?
They were in the agenda. Do you want to delay approving? Do we need a minute?
Did they get put into the calendar?
Yeah. Or we could do them at the next meeting, or we could take a minute, do them later in the day. Minute for the minutes? We'll take a minute for minutes. There's not that many motions.
Just haven't gotten another habit of checking my calendar.
Yeah, I know, because of the binder.
Because of the binder, plus I always go to Town Square when I'm preparing for where I get the agenda review.
Yeah. We're just taking a minute for folks to look at the minutes. Would you like them on the screen?
Screen would be great, please.
Sure, there we go. That's beautiful. Where is that? Is that your computer, Palki? That was Robin. That's beautiful. Okay. Okay, so the minutes for the November 8th meeting are up on the screen. We had a land acknowledgement, we approved the agenda, we had some staff reports, and we adjourned. Are people comfortable approving the November 8th minutes as presented? All those in favor? Great. Now we can move to the November 10 minutes. Yep. There we go. That's who was here. We had 2 electronic joiners, land acknowledgement, and an agenda.
Scott was still listed as acting.
Oh,
We should probably change that at one point, after his 10-year break.
Good catch. Still in the doghouse.
thank you. In the 8th as well, Robin. Yep, thank you. Must be in the. So there was the one motion by Councillor Hillstad, and then otherwise it's just the report of,
Is it appropriate that it's signed by Cheryl Hyde, municipal clerk?
why would it not be?
Well, because the minutes perhaps being taken by Robin.
Oh, I think it's yeah, anyway, we'll double check that. We can double check that. I think it's okay because she files them officially as the clerk. I don't know if it's about who takes them, but we'll double check. Good question. Okay, all those in favor of approving the November 10th minutes with the correction? Carried unanimously. Thank you for keeping us on track, Ms. Danaj. Now we're on to capital. So Ms. Biswa is first. She's going to go through the proposed capital budget and funding, and then we'll get into the specific capital projects. So all you.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. This is the fun stuff. Funding. You can imagine how exciting. Yes. Just do the funding. Let's move on. Okay. So before we dive into the capital presentations, I thought we'll speak a little bit about the funding of the 6-year plan. Okay. So slide shows a summary of the capital expenditures coming up in the next 6 years. This includes the D, or the unfunded projects, which is a total of $4.5 million. And as you can see, the plan ranges from a $14.3 million in 2028 and a $37.4 million in 26. You can see some spikes in the plan in 23, 26, and 27. In 23, it's due to the pump house project. 26 includes public works building construction and Grassy Reservoir capacity upgrade. 2027 includes the Palliser pedestrian crossing. So the capital plan does show us issues to the future, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Replacements, repairs, and maintenance that have been postponed for over the years are now showing up as critical. So the 2023 proposed capital plan is for $37.1 million, and 2024 is $23.4 million, which includes unfunded projects. The total 6-year capital plan amounts to $171.7 million. This table next shows the breakdown between town operations and utilities. Utilities forms a large part of town's capital expenditures every year, the highest being in 2023 for $26 million, which includes the pump house project. So moving into the funding and the affordability of the plan. Funding is valuable information that can assist in your decision-making as we go through this process today. You can find the funding for each of the projects in the capital plan summary, as well as in the detail sheets in your binder. So what were the sources of funding? Grants and reserves are equal portion of the pie, as you can see here, and are the major sources of funding for the next 6 years of capital, followed by debt financing. So the funding sources for the entire 6 years, we are using up $54 million of grants, $8.3 million of operating dollars, $53.7 million of reserves, $37 million debenture, and unfunded of $4.5 million. And I'll speak to each of the funding source by their priority. So starting off with grants. So grants are the first and most volatile source of funding that is used up based on the restrictions in each of the grant streams. As you can see on the slide, the grant balance diminishes as we go from 23 to 28. We've made some big assumptions going into the two streams of the grant that the town receives, which I'll speak to next. So the MSI capital money. MSI has extended its plan for the next 2 years, which is past this conclusion date, and will be replaced with a local government fiscal framework in 2024. We know it'll be a smaller overall envelope of funding, and the allocation methodology is yet to be determined. Currently, the MSI is a combined formula of per capita and assessment. So overall, our MSI allocation for 22 and 23 is $2.6 million, which is a 60% reduction from 21. So the assumption we've made going forward is there'll be further reductions of 10 to 15% in this grant stream due to the uncertainty going into the future. Overall, in the next 6 years, the town is assuming will receive $14.1 million in MSI or similar funding, and drawing $16.7 million for capital projects. I just wanted to highlight a bit of the MSI allocations to show you how it's been volatile over the years. This graph shows right from inception in 2007, our allocations that we have received. You can see we've been hovering over the $4.5 to $5 million mark. A couple of times it has been topped up, but going forward, the projection is $2.3 million from 2024 onwards. So it's kind of dipped quite a bit. The next big grant that we fund projects with is the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly known as the Gas Tax Fund from the federal government. The assumption here we've made is this grant, or in some form, continues on, and the town receives $800,000 each year. There are some other grants that have been used to fund 2023 and 24 capital. Some of them are the $3.7 million that we received for the pump house project from Alberta Municipal Water and Wastewater Program, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for $1.8 million, and flood grants of $4.3 million. Next, we use reserves and debt financing to fund the remaining of our projects. So let's get into reserves a bit here. So the balances for the main categories of reserves, which are capital, utility, development, and operating, are shown on the slide. There are two main capital reserves that we fund most of our projects from, so I'll speak to those in a bit more detail here. First is the general capital reserve. As you can see on the slide, the projected beginning balance in this reserve at the beginning of 23 is $7.1 million. We are contributing $2.85 million to this reserve over the 6-year span, which is coming from transfers from operating budget, while we are drawing $5.2 million for identified capital projects. So as you can see, we're drawing more than we're contributing, so there's nothing remaining for identified needs in the future. The next big one is the asset replacement rehabilitation reserve. We're starting off with a $12.9 million balance in 23. This is the one where we transfer from operating budget based on our long-term strategy, as well as a portion of the franchise fees goes in here, as you had seen on my presentation from last Thursday. So a total of $21 million is being added into this reserve over the 6 years. Again, no increase in franchise fees rates have been incorporated. So the capital funding of $20.3 million is going to come out of this reserve over the 6 years. Even though the beginning balance and the ending balance, you'll see it's approximately $13 million, but we're not contributing anything extra for any future needs in this one as well.
Is this where, sorry.
Yes.
If I may. Is this where, Therese, you were talking about how much we contribute to reserves versus how much or capital projects and how we're not standing with that policy?
Yes,
Can
and I'll
you-
speak to that in
You're
the
gonna
next
speak to
few
that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I will. Okay, so I just wanted to start off with some reserves contribution statistics here. So when we compare our reserves contribution to the asset value and the annual depreciation of town assets, one of the best practices says our contributions to the reserves should be equal or higher than the annual depreciation of each of the years of assets. So as per our 2021 audited financial statements, the net book value of town's assets is $356.5 million. And our annual depreciation booked for 2021 was just a little over $10 million. So therefore, based on this theory and the current reserves transfers in the budget that's in front of you today, the ratio of the capital reserve contribution to the capital asset value, as you can see in the first line there, is 2.5% in 2023 and the same in 24. We are at the 90% mark of the capital reserve contribution as compared to the annual depreciation. So just a fact to note. And this is your slide here, Councillor Wade. So one of the intentions in the long-term financial strategy was to annually contribute to the asset replacement or rehab reserve and the flood mitigation reserve, and increase each of them by $200,000 and $50,000 each, respectively, starting 2016. So Council had made a motion back then. So looking back through history, we have deviated from this intention over the years due to cuts and reductions that have been made to these reserves in order to keep the tax rate lower. So the annual contributions in these reserves have mitigated the overall tax increases over the past couple of years. So you can see on the second column there on the chart, shows ideally what contributions should have been made, and this is as of the 2022 approved budget, whereas the third column shows what actually has been made. So therefore, a gap of $875,000, as Ms. Rogers spoke to in her high-level review there. So this is the calculation that shows us that.
I would just add, what council has decided at times in the past is to sometimes put contributions from any surpluses that we have into this reserve. But it hasn't made up the shortfall over the years. It has helped mitigate some of that shortfall over the years.
Yeah, and I think I'd add that 875 is an annual gap, or it's roughly, yeah, but this isn't the first year that we'll have had, I think Rick's coming to say something.
The total cumulative over the period since 2016 is a little over $4 million that we didn't put in.
Yeah.
But 875 is the number really, the tax-based number that isn't in the budget, so it's kind of the starting point.
It moves, yeah. So it's even sadder than this, so. Okay, so moving into the long-term debt. Very sad. So within the debt management policy, there are certain specified metrics that are required to be reported on annually. So the MGA sets out debt limit, and the town's debt management policy holds the town of Canmore to a stricter debt limit than imposed by the province, as you're aware. So the MGA has specified debt limit for municipalities as 1.5 times the revenue of the municipality. And our debt policy has a stricter requirement of being at 70% of that limit. So as you can see on the slide, the new debt that we'll take on 23 onwards, and that's the red little blocks, it's kind of getting close to the 70% black line, but it's still well below that.
Can you remind me, is the debt for the fire hall in our 2022 debt limit, or is it in 2023?
So the debt is 22, and the servicing starts in 23.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yes. Moving into the total debt servicing, it's the amount of payments related to the debt taken, again addressed in the limit. The MG specifies this limit as 2.25% times the revenue of the municipality, and again, our debt policy has a stringent limit at 70%. So we have room enough for our debt servicing as well. Just wanted to kind of add a slide here to show you the cost of borrowing as of today. It's expected to remain high. The province's loan to local authorities indicative interest rates, which were published this Tuesday, November 15th, are as follows. A couple of years ago, not even 2 years ago, these rates would have been in the range of 2.3 to 3% max. So again, another sad slide. Okay, debt statistics. So the charts that you just saw are kind of translated into numbers here. These are the numerical representations. So with the proposed budget that's coming in front of you today, the 2023 use of debt limit will be at 61.4% in 23, and 24 will be 57%. So again, it's getting close to the 70%, but below that level. Debt servicing for 23 is at 32.2%. For 23, and then 24 is 36.3%, which is well below the 70% limit. The other guideline is debt maturing within the 10 years should be less than 50%, and we are at 9.2. Okay. Next is the percentage of municipal taxes that are used to fund tax-supported debt servicing costs. The limit set in the policy is at 15%. We are well below that at 4.3%, sorry, for 23 and 4.8% for 24. Because we look at utility debts separately and they're based on utility fees and rates, any debt needed for our water, wastewater, solid waste services should be less than 22% of our utility revenue as per our policy. We're kind of getting close to that percentage from 2024 onwards, as you can see on the slide, as larger projects are being debt financed. And kind of my last slide here, the interest rate of our outstanding debt is 3.2%. The interest rate on debt maturing in the next 10 years is at 3.6%, whereas our newer debt maturing greater than 10 years is only at 2.8%. So you'll find some more statistics and some more information in my capital overview on page number 11 of your binders. That's all she wrote. Questions?
I have a question. What lever, just on debt statistics continued when we're looking at percentage of utility user fees, what lever would the town need to pull to bring that percentage number down over the forecasted 2023 to 2026?
Not put so much debt for utility? Not
So
put
higher fees, basically?
Higher fees.
That's the lever I was, yeah, okay. And is it, I know that we have only forecasted to 2026, and then anything beyond that's kind of like black magic. But in that black magic, does our percentage of utility, like does our percentage still continue to stay under 22%, or does it creep up?
Sorry, through the chair. The reason it's 4 years is because our operating plan is 4 years.
Right.
So that's how we
Okay,
show the
but we
window.
don't have anything fuzzy beyond
We can,
2026?
We can, it'll keep escalating higher, for
Okay,
sure.
all right, okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
we know the lever to pull. Thank you.
I would also just add to that we are currently working on revising the utility master plan. It should be done early next year, and then we'll be better able to answer that question.
And probably the policy needs a revisit as well at this point. How long has this been? 2017, 16? So, yeah. There's a few things that needs to be, it made sense way back when, and now it doesn't. Right? 2016, yes. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, then we'll turn it over to Ms. Smithers and team, and we'll walk you through the detailed capital plan.
No, I've got one here with the notes on it. Alrighty. So I'm going to
lead the discussion on the capital budget overview. We're doing things a bit differently than in previous years. Just recognizing that going project by project through every capital item, when some of it is just vehicle replacements and stuff like that, doesn't focus our time or the conversation on those priority items or council plans. So we've made some changes to the presentation, and I'll just jump into it. And I'd be interested actually after the meeting in feedback on whether or not this format is a better way to proceed. So afterwards, please feel free to reach out and give us any feedback. So really on the capital budget, we look at essentially 5 different capital project types, and we've used these 5 buckets to group the capital across the organization. And those types include council priorities, public safety, plans and studies, life cycle and asset management, and growth and upgrades. And I'll just give a brief intro to what each of those are. The council priorities you folks are already familiar with because it's your strategic plan. And Dr. Cottle walked through our focus on council strategic plan and what we're doing to implement it last week-ish. I think it was last week. Anyway, so I won't spend much time on that. Another bucket is public safety. So these would be things like our flood mitigation program, hazard repair for infrastructure. So an example there would be the retaining wall in Prospect Heights, which is in your book, where we know that it is failing in parts and we need to fix it to address some public safety issues. Another item there would be significant risk to the community. So you'll see some IT projects in that category just related to cybersecurity and protecting people's information and data. Another bucket is around plans, studies, and consultations. So these would be things like growth management plans that inform future infrastructure needs, the creation or development of condition assessment reports that inform when we should be doing life cycle maintenance on a number of our assets, and then also studies that include stakeholder consultation, where we want to get some input from stakeholders or community members to inform asset plans going forward. The next bucket is life cycle and asset management. This is by far the largest bucket that we'll be talking about today. It's informed by the projects in this bucket are informed through system level condition assessments. So that is including assets like bridges, roads, trails, buildings, and deep utilities. And we do try as much as possible to combine the roadwork projects and the deep utility projects, because if we're already digging up a road to replace water or sewer mains, we can certainly build it back and do the surface works at the same time. It's also informed by council policy. So an example here would be fleet vehicles. There is a council policy related to when we replace vehicles. So some of the life cycle stuff is simply just following that policy. We also look to inspections and industry best practice. So an example here would be playgrounds, where we know just industry-wide they tend to last about 20 or 25 years till they need to be life cycled out. And then we also do regular inspections for different components of the playgrounds to make sure that they're safe for all the little critters that want to play on them. And then the last thing in that bucket that informs our decisions is looking at assets that are at failure or near failure. So an example here that you'll see in the facilities budget is the ice resurfacer at the rec center. Typically with an ice resurfacer, you can plan on it being in service for about 5,000 hours. The one that we're using at the CRC right now is about 7,000 hours. So I think every time it actually gets off the ice is a win for us. And we can't continue, score! So yeah, we can't continue to rely on it to function efficiently. And then the last bucket is really around growth or upgrade. So this is new or expanded infrastructure that is required by the growth of the community, or just improvements to address user or community or regulatory needs. So we've organized infrastructure across there we go. We've organized the infrastructure discussion across the whole organization under those buckets, and we'll take you through those now. So the first one, again, is the council priority bucket. And there are a few things. I'm sorry, for some reason, when I brought the presentation from my computer to this one, the fonts in the headers went a bit wacky. So if you can't read it there, you can read it in your handout. So the first pillar, or the first goal under the council priority is livability, and I believe Dr. Cottle will do a short intro to a couple of projects there.
I sure will. So the first one is the Reconciliation, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Update. It's a 2023 project for $70,000. Currently, we are working with a consultant to do an assessment of the state of our work on truth and reconciliation and equity, diversity, and inclusion as an organization. So we don't know yet what the results are, but we know that there will likely be some things that we want to intentionally move forward. So this is a placeholder for taking on that work. That might be policy revision, that might be staff training, that might be small dollars to do some changes in signage, things like that, right? But we are on a path to try to address systemic discrimination and to make sure that we are an inclusive and welcoming organization. So it's a small bucket to help us once we're expecting to have the results of this assessment by the end of the year. This allows us to keep that moving. So that's the first one. The second one, do you want to speak to that one, Therese?
I will, yeah, thank you. The second in this bucket is a property tax task force. It's currently an unfunded project, so it would be an option for council to consider adding in. We've included this in livability as we think property tax really has significant impact on livability in our community. I think, as I mentioned in one of my presentations last week, it's been since 2013 that we did this work. Much has changed in our community since then. So really think there's an opportunity to revisit the work that we did there, understanding our commercial tax base and what that looks like now, understanding our residential tax base, understanding the impact of tourist homes and the classification. We have made some changes there on how we assess taxes in those categories led by council. But really looking at that at a higher level, we think would be important in the future here.
Okay, and then under facilities, there are a couple of projects related to livability. The first is an accessibility study, and this is just recognizing that we've never done a study like this for our major municipal facilities, and we should take a closer look at ensuring that members of our diverse community can access all of our facilities. I think this kind of came into view through some of the rec center renovations when we had some feedback that, for example, there was a viewing area for one of the arenas that people in wheelchairs couldn't access. So we did a study we took a look at it and made some improvements to modify so that that area was more accessible. And in doing so, we realized it's probably a good idea to take a look across all of our facilities and ensure that they are accessible and open to all members of our community. The next one, oh, sure.
So, with regards to accessibility, there was a time when you could have plans for, like I know for Elevation Place and maybe even up, maybe for this building, that there's a nonprofit that does reviews of plans to make sure that the buildings are accessible and so on and so forth. Has that nonprofit gone away, or have we found that approach ineffective?
I can't really speak to that. I do know that typically, we would meet the building code, which addresses accessibility to an extent, but it doesn't address all of the challenges that we know we could be facing. So,
yeah, for sure, because
yeah.
the change met the building code, but it certainly didn't meet, I think, many people's expectations of, and that.
I can follow up with
Yeah.
Mr. Hannes and just make sure.
I know that we did that with Elevation Place, and
Yeah.
and it was inexpensive, and it was on a plan-by-plan basis, so it was new infrastructure, and so I understand that's different
Yeah.
than what you're talking about.
Yeah,
but
this is looking across
Yeah.
most of our major facilities. So, but for sure, we'll follow up on that.
They
and
might
get
be
back
more
to you.
cost-effective, that's all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Is this the time when I could ask a question about this project? Or do we go through them sheet by sheet?
Yeah, if you have a question, you can ask it.
What are we defining facilities as only indoor spaces?
For this, we would be, because facilities looks at the buildings in their portfolio.
The issue I wanted to discuss is the Main Street closure as a facility and accessibility, parking. I've heard feedback from people that when we do the Main Street closure, people who have mobility issues struggle to access that space. And so I didn't know if the question would be best asked in the project for closing Main Street or in this study, because this study tells me we're asking the right questions and we're looking at this. And I just wanted to ask if that was
Yeah.
suggest, yeah.
Yeah, no, get what you're saying. Thank you for that.
I was going to
Yeah,
say,
go
yeah,
ahead.
I think we could address that when we get to the Main Street closure projects. Okay, so the next one is the Universal Public Washroom Study. This has come about, again, based on some feedback from members of our community about being able to provide more universal public washrooms so that members of the community feel safe in using washrooms in municipal facilities. We do have the universal public washrooms at at the rec center, and then also many of our washrooms in community parks are universal as well. But this is going to be looking at all heated washroom facilities in town to better understand better understand the regulation and code requirements around universal washrooms, and understand what it would take to either renovate existing washrooms or just build new ones, have some procedures in place around committing to building universal public washrooms as we build out new ones. So this is a study to kind of just get a better understanding of cost implications and priorities, and where we have the most opportunity to make some change in the short term. And then a couple of unfunded projects under livability. They're both in public works. One is the jumping platform at Quarry Lake. So this was part of the, intended to be part of the package of overall improvements we were making at Quarry Lake Park over the past couple of years. As we got into the constructability of it, it turned out to be more expensive than was originally anticipated, so it was taken out of the most recent improvements that included universal washrooms and more of a picnic area. It is going forward in this budget as unfunded, just given some competing demands for capital dollars. And another unfunded project relates to a washroom that we would be installing ideally at the Fitzgerald Rise Playground up in Three Sisters. This is along the regional trail system. There's about 6 kilometers of trail where there's no access to public washrooms, and we do have some demand for one. So that, again, though, is going to be going forward as an unfunded project.
I had a quick question on the universal public washroom study.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very infrastructure-based, like the form. I guess my question is around supplying those washrooms with things once they're operational, whether that fits it. It could fit in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I'm thinking specifically free period products.
Oh, yeah, that's operational, not capital. And we already do that in Elevation Place and the rec center. So we could extend that to other public facilities. That would be an operational add-on. Yeah, great question.
It could be conceptually putting in things, so say it's going to be a structural thing.
Yes, absolutely, and then funded through operating. And I would assume that looking at a universal, that part of the infrastructure would include, part of the study would include considering that infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah, that infrastructure is included even in gendered washrooms, so I think that would be something that would be included in public washrooms going forward, regardless of the format of them. And then the next council goal relates to the environment, with Canmore being a recognized leader in managing human impact on our environment. So the first one up there is an admin item related to the Silvertip Gondola project. Dr. Cottle, you were going to speak to that one, I believe, or do you want me to?
Yes, I am. So as you know, the Silvertip Gondola project is going through NRCB reviews, and the town believes we should apply for intervenor status and be involved to make sure to represent the community in that project. So our town solicitor has sourced legal counsel who would have expertise in this kind of project and work with them to develop a capital budget envelope for what that work might entail. So we have included that in the funded 2023 capital budget to make sure that the town is prepared to participate.
Okay, and then there's some projects here relating to mode shift, which is under the goal, the environment goal. The first is Bow Valley Trail Pathway Improvement South. So this is improving the pathway connection clearly on Bow Valley Trail from Old Canmore Road around the roundabout to the entrance of Spring Creek Mountain Village on the, I always get disoriented, south side of Bow Valley Trail, which currently doesn't have a pathway. Then the next one is bus stop improvements. So there's two parts to this project. One is installing the bus stop infrastructure related to the Quarry Lake transit route. That's about $300,000 funded through a grant. And then the remainder of it is improving the conditions at existing bus stops through town. So that could be shelters, benches, that type of thing, just to make transit a more enjoyable experience in an effort to increase ridership. And then the last project here is pathway network connectivity. This is an ongoing project in engineering where on an annual basis we look for kind of broken links in our pathway network, and we aim to improve those and address those links to also enable more multi-mode travel.
Yes.
It's all good. In Public Works, we have quite a few projects under Council's goal of the environment. The first is related to human-wildlife coexistence. So in 2023, we're looking at developing a strategy and action plan, and then in 2024, starting to implement projects or work coming out of that strategy and action plan. And the goal with human-wildlife coexistence action plan is to really tailor some of the recommendations in the human-wildlife coexistence study and the roundtable and technical working group to the Canmore situation. So we have that umbrella work that was done a few years ago, and we have commitment to proceeding on a regional basis with our partners, and we also recognize there is a need for a Canmore-focused solution that we can, well, not solution, but a Canmore-focused plan that includes implementation items in our community. And then also in 2023, we're looking at developing a climate emergency action plan. I believe Ms. Fournier spoke to this a bit at the Committee of the Whole on Tuesday. This is really integrating our environmental sustainability action plan, our climate action plan, and our climate adaptation plan into one overarching document. They all need a refresh. They're all kind of dated documents, and they don't include current greenhouse gas reduction goals, so we're trying to clean that up. And so again, the plan is going to be in 2023, and then we start implementing that in 2024. Also in Public Works, in Streets and Roads, we are looking at installing public pay EV chargers at Elevation Place and the Rec Center. I believe we're anticipating 2 chargers at each of those facilities to further support people moving to electric vehicles. And then the last 2 projects, I'll speak to the waste characterization study and solid waste services first because it will inform the CRD study in 2024. So the waste characterization study is basically refreshing a study that was done, I believe it was 2016, that looked at our waste diversion. So what's the composition of waste in our community and how much of it is being diverted to composting versus recycling versus just landfill. So we want to refresh that study, get a better sense of currently where are we at, and where have we moved the needle in waste diversion. And then from there, in 2024, the sustainability team will take a look at a construction, renovation, and demolition waste study and plan. And that will be done ideally in conjunction with the Waste Commission, where we're going to look at maybe some policies or bylaws that we could use to, and obviously facilities, right? Because if we're going to require people to divert construction, renovation, and demolition waste, we need to make sure that they're able to do so effectively. So we're going to take a look at what that would entail in 2024.
Could I just go back and ask a question with the EV charger?
Yes.
has the town ever taken a look at potentially where charging of electric vehicles will go? I know it's a new industry, a new infrastructure. But I'm just wondering if, you know, like, you saw the development of the combustion engine and then eventually gas stations, and that's how things were, you gassed up. Do we happen to know, like, is just having chargers at all parking lots, is that likely to be the way of the future, that people can pay? Or is there any study out there that shows whether putting in this type of infrastructure is along the path that's projected, or if it's just we feel like we should do something now? And I know it's small dollars, but I just don't know where this is all going to end up, and if in fact 4 years from now nobody ever uses those because there's something else that's coming down the line.
No, I think it's a really good question. A lot of the work that we have done so far related to EV, both vehicles for town use and chargers townwide, is informed through some of the work coming out of the FCM. So I would imagine that they are more nationally looking at it at more of a systems-based level than a piecemeal, but we can definitely, I can check back in with sustainability and bring that answer back to the committee.
Thanks.
Question too about the similar but not the same. So many of our, not all, but many of the chargers that have been put on public land have been done so by private enterprise. So I think of like the flow line that runs through British Columbia and through Alberta, and then I know like we have the chargers that sit in the parking lot behind the Union Hall, as well as the one in front of Arts Place, and I believe Shops at Canmore, but that would be on private property. Over at Boston Pizza, also private property. Is there an opportunity to have private enterprise install this instead of us, or?
Private, like, are you referring to?
Well, so in all of those cases, well, not, yeah, in all those cases, it was private enterprise that used our public infrastructure to install their charger. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if that is still a more cost-effective way of going instead of doing it ourselves.
So to answer that in part, if you look at, so there is another upgrade to an EV charger at Arts Place. If you look on page 172 of your binder, yeah, of that tab in the binder, it does speak to the fact that that was originally installed by this Sun Country Highway Initiative in 2016, and it was installed for free, and what we're to be a free charging station. And what we're finding is with the increasing energy costs, as EVs become more popular, we're moving to pay stations.
Right.
So we are.
So the ones behind the Union Hall are pay stations, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. Right, but that one at Arts Place is not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're transitioning to pay stations as we upgrade them as well, just recognizing that the energy costs are increasing, and as we take them on, there is a maintenance and operation cost.
Perfect. I would like to say that the mayor of St. Albert did a Western tour in her new EV car and stopped in Canmore and texted me and said, very clever to have this downtown, because now I'm going to go have a very expensive lunch.
Excellent.
While my car charges. So it was a twofer. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Also in the environment, we have 3 unfunded projects in the capital budget. One is, again, in facilities, the rooftop solar installation at the salt shed. So this is the last remaining significant rooftop in our municipal portfolio that would be really well suited to solar. It would be a very good project because it could create kind of a micro generation facility between the Volker, so that salt shed is on the land that we contract to Volker, but between that works yard, between our Boulder Crescent Depot, and between the Public Works building. However, the challenge we have there is the funding that we would have received in the past for solar projects through the Municipal Climate Change Action Center is no longer available to us. So that would be a $550,000 spend in 2024 that we do not have funded, given competing priorities. Another unfunded initiative is in engineering related to mode shift initiatives. And this would be really to kind of both the mode shift initiative project on page 147 in your binder is really kind of a collection of initiatives that could advance our mode shift goals in the community. So some of that relates to the 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit throughout town. Some of it is about improved signage on pathways. Some of it is about exploring bike share opportunities and things like that. So I will say in this project, there is currently in the transportation safety and accessibility bucket, project that we'll get to later on, $25,000 allocated to the speed limit reduction project. That is consistent with the integrated transportation plan. So if this mode shift initiative remains unfunded, we would still proceed with that 30-kilometer-an-hour project. And then the last unfunded project.
Can I ask a question on that last one? So I noticed that mode shift initiative, involves a lot of different pieces. Is it open to councils to sort of pick and choose?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, so I see that there's e-bike incentive program, but then there's also additional paid parking, and that could bring revenue, but we have to weigh whether we want paid parking out there and e-bike. So there's some things that might be interesting to some aspects of it. But
Absolutely,
yeah.
And that's a good point. So thank you, because I meant to raise that and I forgot. I think that it's really about if council chose to really focus on shifting travel behaviors, there are a variety of tools at our disposal. So I think engineering has put a few of what they see as the most impactful ones into this project, and there certainly is an opportunity within that project to say this would be good, not sure we're ready for that yet. So that is, and it's all unfunded anyway, so council could definitely remove from that bucket if they chose to fund some of the projects. And the last project that is unfunded currently is a public works project related to a dog park in Spring Creek. So this is under environment because one of the goals in the town providing dog parks is trying to keep unleashed dogs out of habitat patches and wildlife corridors. So to do so, we need to provide an alternative. We do have a few dog parks in town already. It has been in the plan to build one in the Spring Creek area, but again, it's not funded in the current budget. Over to relationships, another council goal around respectful, authentic relationships are the foundation upon which our future success is built. Dr. Cottle.
Yeah, the first one is not new. It's just a repeat of the one that was already in livability. We've just acknowledged that it could fit in two places. But the second project, Indigenous Consultation Support, is $50,000 in 2024. And that's really around, right now, all of the Truth and Reconciliation work is side of desk through the Truth and Reconciliation Internal Working Group and our efforts with developing meaningful connections with the Stoney Nakoda Nation. So we know we need to broaden beyond the Stoney Nakoda to include all Treaty 7 and Métis Region 3 nations, and just to get us to the next level, we could really benefit from some focused support on relationship building, connections, and figuring out how to move forward the most high impact, meaningful things in a thoughtful and appropriate way. So this is really about getting some support to help us refine our plan and move priority items forward.
Okay, and then the last foundation upon which our success is also built, I just realized we have two foundations. Anyways, relates to just the financial stewardship, human resources, and community engagement. So I believe, Dr. Cottle, you were to speak to this service level review as well.
I am. We're right now just in the beginning phases of phase 1 of our service level review. We're working with a firm called MNP. And we've currently sent them a whole bunch of different town documents and plans and data points, and they are working on creating a draft of what our current service levels are. And then they'll do a bunch of testing and truthing of that with, all staff will receive a survey, and then we'll work specifically with departments to make sure that they have articulated the accurate and appropriate service level for what that department is currently providing. So that'll get us an inventory. And phase 2 is really about how we then potentially use that inventory for something like this exercise in budgeting. So right now, it's really difficult for us if council were to say, well, what is the service level of, what level are we providing X service? And if we funded it more or less, what would that mean? We don't have a consistent way to answer that question across the organization. So phase 2 is really meant to look at taking what we get from phase 1 and applying it for budgeting purposes and decision-making purposes going forward.
Second item on that list is unfunded. It's not a project, it's really what we've been talking about for the last couple of days, where we need to do an update to our long-term financial strategy, really to understand better the gap that we've been talking about and what our approach moving forward needs to be. We just did want to highlight it there because it is foundational to all of this work that we're talking about.
It's ironic that that's unfunded.
Yes.
I didn't want to say that,
just say
but yes.
on that, part of what we've recognized is that in the 2023 and 2024 years, administratively, we need to do some work around what this looks like, what a new approach is, figure out, we mentioned earlier a potential policy update, a potential update to the long-term financial strategy. So it's our plan when we bring council the 2025-2026 budget that we will have a path forward that we recommend to you at that time.
My question is, so it's 850,000 per year that it's unfunded, or is it, that's the total that we're unfunded right now?
875,000 is this year's gap.
Okay, all right, that's what I was trying to
Yeah.
remember, if it was the total or if it was the annual gap.
The
Thank you.
total gap is about 4 million.
Okay, right, I have that. Thank you.
Okay, so then moving away from the council strategic priorities and goals to the other buckets of infrastructure that we deal with. First up is public safety. And Ms. Rogers, you'll keep on trucking.
Yes, so we're starting with a couple of projects in information technology. We are working to migrate our data center to the cloud, where we believe we'll have increased security and safety of our information. And certainly something that we've seen with organizations who've had cybersecurity attacks is those that can access their data from the cloud are able to get up and running much more quickly than those that have on-premises data storage. And so we're moving in that direction. And then the second is a bit of a bucket, again, for cybersecurity and just really being able to implement ongoing changes to our networks and our data and how we access and store information to continue to improve our safety and security.
Okay, and then in engineering, 3 projects related to the flood mitigation for our steep creeks in the community. First is the design, and then the second project is construction related to hazard mitigations on Three Sisters Creek. Just anticipating future development in that area and the need to ready the area against the flood risk. And then the other is Stone Creek. So that's not Stoneworks Creek, which is the one adjacent to the Palliser land, but Stone Creek is up in Stone Creek in the Silvertip lands. And that's a project that we'll be taking on in 2024. And most of this work is funded through federal and provincial grants. And then another project in engineering is the Prospect Heights retaining wall. As I mentioned earlier, there are some areas, some segments in that wall that are starting to experience some failure, so we do need to get in there and stabilize it. And then also,
Ms. Smithers?
oh, sorry, yes.
Is that the retaining wall that's just past the bridge across Canmore Creek?
When you go across the bridge and then hang a left and there's that sharp uphill, like on the
It's like a big block, limestone block retaining wall?
yeah.
Okay. Was that not part of the original pathway mitigation or remediation?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I'm not sure. Let me find the page in the binder. Yeah, it just, in the project sheet on page 115, it just says it was constructed during the development of the Prospect subdivision in the mid-1990s. So it was really about stabilizing that, the projects up above.
Is there any, I mean, I imagine retaining walls are supposed to last more than 30 years. Is there a cause that's attributed to it, or is there any sort of recourse with regards to something if it was built faultily?
I would think not, given that it was built in the 1990s. I think that window would have passed. So I'm not sure exactly what was in the geotechnical report. It's just that it does identify some instabilities that need to be addressed. Okay, and then the last, again, in the engineering department, there are annual projects just related to transportation and safety and accessibility. So this is just identifying localized areas throughout the community where, again, we've had feedback, sometimes from schools, sometimes just from residents, sometimes from the RCMP or municipal enforcement, identifying problem areas in our transportation system and looking at whether improvements can be made to improve safety of all users. Sometimes that can be crosswalks, sometimes it's better signage, that type of thing. So the next bucket that we have in capital relates to plans, studies, and consultations. The first of which is some work that we need to do with the school boards in town on a joint use planning agreement. This is a requirement of the province. Ideally, it was to have been completed this year, but given that we are not in a position where we will be having any lands this year being subdivided that would trigger the taking of school reserve, the province was okay with, as were the other school boards, they were okay with delaying completion of this. But that said, we do need to get the work done in 2023, and we will be contracting out support to draft that agreement with the school boards in town.
The business transformation projects is a continuation of work we began after the organizational review in 2018. And we continue to really rely on this capital project to allow us to advance process reviews. A couple of things on our list right now that we're going to be looking at is some formalizing of process around project management. We're also prioritizing the update of construction contract templates, which we see as real high risk potentially for the organization and the community. And so that as we identify where these challenges exist, it's hard to know sometimes in advance where that's going to be. And so we found this approach, having this bucket that allows us to address priorities quickly, to be very effective.
As far as the public art master plan is concerned, this plan will essentially provide guidance as to where and when public art in our community is placed. Right now we lack a guide as to exactly how to use our art trust fund when it comes to acquiring and placing public art. So that'll provide a plan for that. On the tourism economic impact assessment, this was a project originally planned for 2022, but given the impacts of the pandemic, doing that assessment at this time seems like it would be skewed. So the proposal is to move that to 2024. And that's a project in collaboration in many ways with TCK.
Why would we only look at the economic impact of tourism and not also the environmental and social impact? And in future, I may text you my questions.
I'll have to revisit that project scope, but I do think that that's that I'm going to say that more triple bottom line type approach is certainly in keeping with TCK's approach and their brand refresh, et cetera. Yeah. Mhm.
You can whisper in the mic. So under facilities, there is, this is actually a study, the condition assessment for Elevation Place. A condition assessment for Elevation Place hasn't been done in the past, mainly because the building was pretty new when we took on condition assessments for other facilities. It is around 10 years old now. And as an old building with a lot of highly technical, mechanical, and electrical systems in it, in a whole bunch of water, we are starting to see that there are some life cycle repairs and maintenance that we have already been undertaking, but we want to do the condition assessment to try to be a little more proactive in addressing some of those systems and the replacement of those systems in the building. So the condition assessment is about $150,000 out of that $500,000 spend in 2024. The remainder of that would be ideally to be able to address some of the high priority repairs that are identified in the condition assessment itself. The noise abatement study is one in engineering that is unfunded, and this was really studying primary sources of and the nature of traffic noise pollution in the community. Kind of goes without saying the biggest source of traffic noise pollution would probably be the Trans-Canada Highway. The intent of this study would be to inform discussions with the province related to noise attenuation. This is unfunded currently, though. And then the last plan or study is really around odor control at the wastewater treatment plant. As you all know, because I've seen some of the emails, there were some concerns related to odor control and odor emanating from the wastewater treatment plant this summer. So there was a project in the capital plan in utilities to address this in later years. It has been brought forward to 2024 to try to get ahead of that and address it earlier. We could, I've confirmed with Mr. Camo, we could advance the design to 2023. However, any construction coming out of this design project would remain in 2025.
I just wondered if I could go back one session to Mr. Mackay. I had a question. In last term, I thought that we did sort of a plan for art placement, or was it just for specific art? Do you recall when our last placement study was done, or if there was one done?
I
don't know if it was just for specific.
So, yeah, and I recollect,
projects?
yeah, and I have a vague recollection of, and I don't know if it was for Tony's art, or
That's
if
what I
it
was
was
wondering, yeah.
just, here are some places where we could put art.
That's what I thought, yeah.
I'll have to
Just curious,
follow up on
if you
that
would
one
mind.
unless.
If you'd follow up,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
please.
Thank you, sorry.
Sometimes they all meld into each other after a while, so I'm like, I remember having a discussion last year, maybe the year before. So when did Tony leave? Last spring? Can't remember.
So I have a question around the odor control facility design. Okay, thank you for confirming it could be moved ahead to 2023. So do we know what it is that is needed then? And that's the reason that we know that we couldn't do construction ahead of 2025? Because we have a sense of what that would cost?
I believe
Odor control facility.
that, sorry, I'm just trying to flip around in my book here. I think part of the construction advancing in 2025, and part is just workload capacity because the pump house is also slated for construction in advance, so that kind of sucks a lot of the oxygen out of the room. And then some of it is the construction is about $2 million, so I would imagine some of that the construction for the odor control facilities is flagged at about $2 million in 2025, so I would imagine some of that is also just funding. How do we prioritize within that bucket of funds available for us on the water utility?
Okay. I guess I'm wondering, I mean, that goes to suggest that we do know what the problem is and what needs to be done?
I think, as Mr. Camo has said in the past, I think some of it is just climate. When we're experiencing hotter days and more wind and changing winds, that contributes to how odors can carry from the treatment plant. So in the project sheet, it does, on page 223, it does indicate it's investigating methods to contain and control odors. It identifies the main sources of odor, so the clarifiers, the biological aeration filtration cells, and the digesters and holding tanks, right? So I think it's really investigating those as the three main source of odors. We can't do anything about climate action, so temperatures and the wind, but it's saying, looking at those three main components, are there adaptations or modifications we could do?
I guess maybe I'll come at it a different way. I see the design as finding the answer, or finding an answer, to deal with those things that are likely to get worse, not better, given that they're trending that way. And so if we don't know the answer to them yet, how can we know a construction cost?
Oh, fair point.
And therefore, how do we know we couldn't do it till 2025? For example, because I've been getting lots of emails from people with different technologies around the world, by lots, I mean two or three, but I've never had anybody approach me about mitigating odors before until it hit the news, and there are biological solutions that are being suggested that may not have much of a construction component. And so if the design suggests that one of those would work, then maybe it could be something that could be implemented sooner to bring relief. So I am supportive of finding the answer, or an answer, earlier than later, so at least we can tell people what we have found and what the plan is. I'm just a little bit concerned when we say definitively it won't be till 2025 when we don't know an answer yet.
Well, and by definitively, council can always recommend changes. I do suggest, though, that part of the challenge would be around resourcing, but I can follow up with Mr. Camo on that. I would also suggest that the system that the town uses for wastewater treatment around biological aeration is fairly unique. So I am not sure with some of those calls that you're getting with potential solutions, how many would apply, because I believe that our wastewater treatment plant operates differently than the traditional ones that you would find in many other communities. But certainly we could look at, and the other thing I wanted to speak to is the $2 million is really, it's a placeholder, and that is fairly common in capital planning. When we know we need to repair or replace something, we have a best estimate of what that project could cost, and we refine it once the design is done. It was the same thing for the fire hall that's currently getting built, same thing for the pump house. Like, as we get closer to development and we refine the design, we have a better estimation of what the cost could be. So we could certainly look at, it wouldn't surprise me if that $2 million would change as we go into the budgeting for 2025, and we could be clear with the water utility that based on the findings of that design stage, maybe council would want to see another report come forward on what a solution could look like, what the cost of it could be, and how early it could be implemented.
Mm-hmm. I would love to have that design study done as soon as possible in 2023, in case it's something when we're at this time next year looking at 2024, if there's an interim or alternative solution that is easier to implement, less expensive. And thank you for noting that the 2 million is a placeholder, and I certainly understand that, but I think it has to be, because it is a very much a quality of life issue for some of our residents, it's important that we address it sooner than later, and at least then have answers for them so that they can understand. And I just wanted to explore that so that it's not looking like, yeah, we know there's a problem, but we're not going to really address it until later, right? And I know it's been moved forward, but I just appreciate that maybe we can look at it sooner and see if there's anything that can be done sooner.
I wonder if the, like, this talks about design, and we're really not at the design stage yet. We're at the figured out the problem. We're still studying the problem.
I think that's what the design stage is set to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Design and study and then design.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on that? Okay,
Can we go back to the noise abatement study?
yes.
So, if the main cause of noise in town is the #1 highway, I think anecdotally everybody probably knows that. Do we have, so this would just go back to the province and say, hey, the highway that's running through our town is noisy, can you make it less noisy?
As it says in the project sheet, it would inform discussions with the province with respect to Alberta Transportation's noise guidelines and any mitigations that could be done at a local level.
And there are some local level solutions too, like speed limit reductions and
I'm suggesting locally within the town's control. A speed limit reduction on the Trans-Canada Highway would not be something within the town's control.
speed limits within the town.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A presentation earlier this year mentioned plans to expand the highway size. When Andy was talking about the pedestrian overpass, he said Alberta Transportation has indicated they want to go to an 8-lane highway through Canmore.
Oh.
I'm wondering if that is part of, like, that would form part of this conversation. But
No, it's a fair point. So we can ask, we can follow up with engineering on what they have heard about, if that's, how far out that horizon is. I would imagine going into that, this type of study would become more necessary, clearly, for the town. I'm not aware of it being on any short or midterm horizon, but we can follow up.
well, I think one noise abatement is not to expand the highway, but to increase transit. So I would be, at this point, concerned about those plans in relation to our work to reduce noise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was one of those things that was said. Yeah, I heard that too, I remember. And then I was just like, what? But there's nowhere for us to go with that.
Well, I was trying to figure out, I don't think I responded that way, only because I was like, so they're gonna go from an 8-lane and then go into the park into 4 lanes. Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
And I think with the current, or the more recent announcement from the Premier about the train, yeah, anyway, I think I've noted the question, and we can see if we have any more recent
Yeah.
updated info. Yeah.
Okay.
And then just from a timing perspective, because this life cycle asset management is a fairly meaty, beefy section, I'm wondering if we want to take a break. We're almost at 10:20. We could take 10 minutes and come back at 10:30. Okay? Okay, we're back, and we're just gonna pick up, unless there's any questions, we'll just pick up right where we left off with life cycle and asset management. So over to you, Ms. Smithers.
Okie dokie. So the largest bucket of capital projects relates to life cycle and asset management. As I mentioned before, this is really just kind of responsible maintenance of assets owned by the town, guided by condition assessments, council policy, industry best practice, and just recognizing when assets are at failure or near failure.
Our first bucket in this category is some information technology projects. And we have life cycle impacts in IT as well. So one project that we have included in 2023 is a replacement of our audiovisual equipment right here in council chambers. So the mics that we're using today are actually past their life cycle, and we are no longer able to get parts for them, as an example. So we really do need to revisit our setup here, and so we've expanded the scope of that project a little bit to ensure that we're looking holistically at council chambers. So we're partnering with facilities just to see if there are any facility changes that we need to make. For an example, our admin group has grown in size bigger than what the tables were originally set to accommodate. So that's what that project is all about. We're also looking at agenda software options that may help us with more efficient agenda management in the future. Some of those providers link audiovisual with agenda software, and so it's a time just to look at that. So we will be reaching out to council once we have a bit more information, just to make sure that you're in the loop on what we're looking at, and also make sure that we address the needs that you have for council chambers. The next two are really buckets of equipment replacement on the PC side, so laptops, tablets, that level of equipment, it also gets old, needs to be replaced. And then we have some network equipment that we have to look at as well. Did you have a question? Oh, you looked like you were getting ready to hit your mic, so please stop me anytime if you are. And then on the network upgrade side, again, just some on-premises network equipment that needs to be replaced. We are working always to have a backup for all of our systems. One of the things that we have continued to be surprised by, I think, is how reliant we are on our systems. And some systems that we weren't initially even aware of that have an IT component. Like our last fire truck that we bought, for example, it needed to have IT involvement before we could drive it here, which was a bit of a surprise to us. And so we're really trying to make sure that we have these layers of protection, given that town services essentially grind to a halt when we've got issues either around network, or if we have unstable equipment, or if we had a cyber attack. So that really is the focus of all of that. And then on the finance system side, our current finance system provider has said that they are likely to be retiring this product in the next 24 to 36 months. And so again, similar to our audiovisual equipment, we will no longer be able to have supported system. And so we want to get ahead of that, obviously, because the finance system is important. And so what we're doing, really appreciate the approach that our new manager of IT is bringing to this work. Very similar to what Ms. Smithers talked about on the construction side, looking at design and then construction. We're starting with a needs assessment and then implementation. And so you'll see that throughout a couple of those projects. We're really getting clear on what it is we need, then going out to vendors to find out which solution is going to solve those needs best for us, and then implement in the following year.
Okay, and then some late-breaking news on the odor control project that Mayor Krauser had some questions on. I had some back and forth with Mr. Camo, who has indicated he has confirmed in the utility rate model that we could move construction up to 2024. And the $2 million is a placeholder, so we would, if it was moved up, we would come back, if required, with a budget adjustment in fall 2023.
On the record, thank you.
You are welcome. Okay, facilities. Few things on the life cycle and asset management list. One is in advance of that condition assessment that we're planning for 2024 for Elevation Place, there are some immediate needs related to replacement and maintenance of equipment. That includes things like chemical controllers for some of the pools, the steam generator thingy for the steam room, and waterproofing of pool gutters, and just some of the grout stuff. So it's a lot of, again, kind of like some of the other projects that I've mentioned, where we just see ongoing annual needs to repair and replace stuff. This is kind of where we're likely headed with Elevation Place, just given the complexity of the building and the age of the facility. The Scout Hall repairs and maintenance, that's just a number of components of the building have reached the end of their life cycle, windows, roof, that type of thing. So it's some much needed maintenance for the Scout Hall. Mayor Crosser.
I'm sorry, just going back to the Elevation Place life cycle repairs and maintenance, how does that tie in with the EP condition assessment and priority repairs? Yeah, there's the 500K in 2024, and is this one then just to tide us over till 2024?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
This is comprised of repairs that we know right now are needed, because some of these elements of the building are starting to fail, so like the chemical controllers and stuff like that. And then even in spite of having replaced those things, we know we need to do the condition assessment to try to get ahead of some of the asset rehab and replacement work that facility needs. Okay? Elk Run Maintenance Facility. So again, this is the facility that we rent out to Volker Steven for their road depot. So here we need to look at replacing, again, some roofs, windows, and doors, and mechanical and electrical systems. It is an aging facility that needs some attention, and it hasn't had some in a while. So we know in 2024, we need to do some work there to keep it as a functioning works yard that we then lease out to Volker Steven. Also, 2024 is the Olympia ice resurfacer replacement that I spoke to earlier. It is living on borrowed time, and we can figure we can eke another year out of it. But it gets, a lot of vehicles and equipment like that gets to the point where it's costing us more to keep them running than to just replace them. So that's where we're looking at that ice resurfacer replacement in 2024.
Is that the one that lives at the rec center? Because then there's the one that drives around.
Yes, this is the one that lives at the rec
Okay.
center.
And the other one that drives around, we got a couple more years left in that one, hey?
Yeah, it's not in the
Perfect.
in the portfolio here, so I would say yes. And then a boom lift replacement, that's just to access some of the higher parts of buildings for like light bulb repairs, maintenance, cleaning, that type of thing. Again, it's just an older piece of equipment that needs some replacement.
Elk Run Maintenance Facility, the contract with Volker Steven, when does that expire? Or when?
I would have to check. I believe we renewed it fairly recently. I think we did, just in the last couple of years, and I think it's a 10-year lease, yeah. Yeah, it brings in, I think it's around $250,000 a year in revenue, I think.
I guess my question is, do we structure those lease agreements so that there's money coming in from that payment that we then use to replace the building? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so the revenue that comes in from the lease goes into the operating budget in facilities. And it just is part of the lease agreement. Like there are certain repairs and maintenance that the tenant is responsible for, but these are bigger items that it really falls under the purview of the town.
I was thinking in terms of trying to look at everything through that long-term financial strategy, and then thinking, well, if we have people who lease buildings, that is a place where we can also perhaps be getting having money go towards replacing a building.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it kind of builds on the discussion that we started to have with Quarry Lake Park, right? Like if we're moving, are there areas where as an organization we could be moving more to a user fee, user pay model, right? So which is essentially what you're saying. I'm not quite sure how that could be structured in the financial sense, because I think we would almost have to have a reserve for every building that gets leased. But it may be, what we could maybe do though is look at some transparency and how those leases assume a certain level of long-term asset rehab, repair and maintenance, and that's accounted for in the structure of the lease, yeah.
It is a revenue source.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's a
thanks
good
for
point.
raising it. We'll make a note and look at it with a strategy. Thank you.
I don't even know if my brain is thinking right, but I was like,
No, it's a really fair point. Then also in life cycle and asset management on the engineering side. So I have a couple of slides with some of these big ticket engineering items. So let me get through them, and then when we get to the big reveal, you can ask questions if you have them. One is around the Bow Valley Trail and Teepee Town street and drainage improvements. As I had mentioned at the outset, we tend to, wherever possible, align deep utility replacements with the surface works and the street improvements. So we are looking at some, for both the Bow Valley and Teepee Town street and drainage and the Teepee Town 2nd Avenue rehabilitation and design and construction. And at the bottom there, the complete street improvement for Railway Ave and Central. A lot of that is either wastewater or water mains or both needing replacement. And then when we build the street back, it's the surface works and the pathways and sidewalks and that type of thing that we build it all back together. And I'll show that again in a little bit. And then the bridge asset management, that's informed by condition assessments on bridges. I think the 2024 work is 2023. I'd have to check my notes. Off the top of my head, I think 2023 relates to some work that needs to be done with some structures along the spur line. Yeah, that's the spur line replacements and preliminary design for the pier replacements for, I think, the westernmost piers of the engine bridge need replacement. So then 2024 is dealing with construction of some of that. And then street and drainage rehab is, again, one of those more generic buckets that we know there are road surfaces that are going to fail. We know they're going to require some redesign, and it's not just going to be mill and overlay. We don't know exactly where they are. In some cases, we do have a good idea. In some cases, we don't. So it's really just that rolling fund that allows us to address problems as they come up. And then on the water utility side, what's the best way to do this? So again, on the water utility side, you will see, I'll jump over the first two, but I will come back to them. The Bow Valley Trail wastewater upgrade phase 2 and 3, the Bow Valley Trail water upgrade phase 2, and the Railway Ave wastewater upgrade. Those all relate back to those projects in engineering that I talked about, and that is a lot of money between all of those projects in the water utility and engineering. It's about a $19 million spend. So I pulled together this map to give people an idea of where we're talking about. So the kind of yellowy and orangey red projects are the two Bow Valley Teepee Town and Teepee Town 2nd Ave projects. In those areas on the map, and it probably shows up a bit clearer in your handout, that's where we are replacing the wastewater mains and the water mains, and then we're doing the road works, and we're also doing some sidewalk and bicycle pathway improvements when we put everything back together. On Railway Avenue Central and Green, that's the wastewater main that needs replacement, and again, as we put everything back together, we'll be doing road works and sidewalk and bike pathway improvements to build it back in a more contemporary manner that is aligned with our integrated transportation plan. And then also, just for the sake of reference, on the bottom there in blue is the Bow Valley Trail South sidewalk and bike pathway improvements that I talked about in the environment goal for Council's strategic plan. So maybe I'll just see if there's any questions related to all that deep utility and road work stuff.
I'm really happy to see that Teepee Town work moving forward, and it really lays the groundwork for how redevelopment will move through that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Yeah. We are happy to be headed there. And then going back on the water utility side, so there's the UV disinfectant system life cycle that needs to be done in 2023. Again, all of this is life cycle related. It's not much new. The big one that I had referenced before is that Pump House 2 replacement and capacity upgrade, the construction of that in 2023 at $20 million. This is a revamped project. Initially, we were looking at just expanding the capacity of the pump house, but that was supposed to be done in 2018, and as we got into the design of it, it became apparent that it's more cost-effective and efficient to just replace the existing building because it is about 40 years old. And I think, Councillor Ma, to your question at Committee of the Whole, we won't know exactly about the energy efficiency with the new building till it's kind of up and running at full capacity, but we can estimate that based on kind of this building compared to a similar sized industrial building that's about 40 years old, it's probably going to be about 35 to 40% more energy efficient. Yeah. So that is that, and then what else is left? Oh, the sewer main replacement design for Elk Run. That will take place in 2024. And then we've got some other capacity upgrades at the wastewater treatment plant and replacement of a Vector truck in 2024. Don't ask. It's the big vacuum truck that goes down that manhole, yeah. It vectors. Okay, so if there's no other questions on the water utility, go back, there's the map again. Oh my gosh, okay. And then life cycle, I was like, and there's more, but wait. So we are also looking at in Public Works a playground life cycle up in Lady Mac. We've been trying to do one playground life cycle a year. Part of that is just as I mentioned before, they should be replaced every 20, 25 years. The other thing is some of the pressure-treated wood that is in existing playgrounds, like the Lady Mac one, is not actually permittable in new playgrounds, so we're trying to get rid of that as we go through.
Is that the one that's right where Lady Mac turns at the top of Moraine?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lady Mac goes down and goes to Moraine, okay.
Yeah. Trail service rehab, I think on the page 153 in your binder, there is a list of the trails that we typically keep an eye on for this project. It's not, it's replacing segments of each of those pathways, again, just based on kind of condition assessments and where we're seeing some looming safety hazards. Light fleet vehicle replacements and the fire rescue 3/4 ton replacement, those are in keeping with the vehicle replacement policy. That's why they're on the list now. The heliport landing pad surface replacement, that is the one public helipad at the heliport. The others are all handled by Alpine in the lease we have with them. And I just want to flag too, in the project sheet on page 163, it does flag that it's unknown if the existing sub-base was damaged in the 2013 flood. This $65,000 assumes that the sub-base is still sufficient. If it isn't, we'll have to come back with another capital project. But we don't know till we start ripping it into it. There's also a parks vehicle replacement in there. Again, just a life cycle, yeah, and the rest are just equipment life cycling in Public Works. Solid waste services, we are looking at some container replacements in both 2023 and 2024. These are just as they get older, they start to wear out and break and they need to be replaced. And actually this is really linked to the condition of the trucks as well, because as the containers start to weaken at certain points, it can cause damage to the trucks if we don't replace them. We're looking at a new large item cleanup vehicle. We have one right now, and if it is out of commission, we can't pick up the large items. And when we're really trying to encourage people to call when they have large items and not just leave them at the collection bins, we need to be able to respond and pick them up. So there's enough demand there that a second vehicle is helpful. We're looking at replacing some pedestrian containers as well in both 2023 and 2024, and also replacing one of the 3-ton collection vehicles. Mayor Crosser, your mic is on. I'm not sure if you have a question.
I know I read it in the narrative, and now I can't seem to find it. The Larch Area Redevelopment Plan, unfunded, where would I find that in?
Yeah, that is in, it doesn't have a project sheet because I think it was in 2025. Let me, just give me a minute. Yeah, it's in 2025.
Okay, so it's in the
planning in
narrative,
2025.
Yeah,
right?
and it's still showing as unfunded. We just only do the project sheets for the first 2
Okay,
years.
I was just looking at the, okay, that's,
Thanks.
gotcha, thank you.
Okay.
This actually goes back a little bit, just, I had to search for something, but with the Railway Ave phasing, just looking back at our minutes from way back in 2019, so it says here in the minutes that direct administration to return to council for approval Phase 2 Railway Ave Central and Phase 3 Railway Ave North prior to commencing detailed design to those phases. So do we have a timeline when that's going to happen? Just because in the project report it just says that there'd be updates, but doesn't state that part of it, of us actually approving the detailed design and all that stuff?
Yeah, I would have to go back and check, like, I think Railway Avenue Central was one of the projects that we canceled in the first year of COVID when we had to redo the budget. So it's a hard one to follow the bouncing ball on, but I can definitely come back with some information on that.
Thank you.
I have another question about the repurposing of the fire hall, the design piece. When do we expect the fire hall to be commissioned?
Oh, I haven't gotten to that one yet. No.
Oh, are we, sorry, I'm in wrong, sorry, I'm ahead. I'll wait, I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm playing Tetris in my head, that's why.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, so any other questions on that last slide on the life cycle and asset management? No, okay. So last bucket is the growth and upgrade work. Yes.
What happened, and I know the answer, what happens if we don't spend all these amounts? Does that then form a surplus, or is it just not spent? Right, like if we have like $150,000 for container replacement, but we don't use all 150.
Yeah, that's a big question. So in terms of so there's a couple of things, right? It depends on the funding source. Some of it would just go back to reserve. A lot of this stuff, particularly the PED bins or whatever as an example, those are all funded through solid waste services reserve, right? So it would go back to the reserve. Some of it is grant funded. So we would, in some cases, the grant's fungible like MSI, so we could move that around to other projects, but in other cases it isn't, so we would lose the grant. And then the other piece is just aside from that funding piece of it, that when you look at the projects in the life cycle and asset management bucket, what would happen would be we wouldn't take on those repairs or replacements. And then I think if you look at the front pages of the capital overview on page 4, it indicates the impact of moving from maintenance to rehabilitation to replacement. So if we push some of these, we try to hit a sweet spot where we push stuff back as far as we can.
I get sick before I go to Vancouver.
But we know the cost is going to escalate if we continue to push it back. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot of we've gotten as much life out of the asset as we can without having to incur more cost because it's going to completely fail down the road. So it's a bit of a balance, one on the funding picture, but I think and then the other on the asset side. And I think particularly in that life cycle and asset management bucket, we need to be make decisions based on full information of understanding of what could happen in terms of cost down the road by delaying some of those projects.
Slight nuance, we don't draw from the reserve until we do the project. So rather than going back to the reserve, it just stays there. And then we only draw when we actually do the project, so. Yeah.
just want to check with Mr. Irwin. Was there anything you wanted to add? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the growth and upgrade projects, over to Mr. Mackay.
Growth and upgrade projects. And in some ways, this category in some ways are for projects that don't fit cleanly or strongly within one of the other categories. And so you'll see that a little bit as we walk through. The Main Street Pedestrian Zone project is really to continue with the Main Street pedestrianization in 23-24, and then inform future pedestrianization plans with the downtown ARP is the plan there. Maybe before these other two projects, I can jump back to the question around public art plans. So in, I believe it was 2020, the cultural master plan was presented to council. And that document would be fairly high level and more, I guess, outcome-based, whereas a public art plan, the proposed capital project, would say more of this type of art in this location this year, and tie that to the planned contributions and other draws from the reserve. That clarifies that. Okay. Sure.
Main Street pedestrian zone. It's the same question I asked earlier.
Oh, yes, thank you. I meant to address that one. It's, the accessibility piece is not addressed specifically in here, but what I will say is if there's accessibility feedback that's being provided, that's certainly, we'd like to receive that and see if it's possible to respond to it. So I'm not sure if that's been delivered to administration.
It's one of those ones where like people express themselves, but they don't direct it to the right place. So for me, it's a flag because I know we really want, I think it's a value of ours to be an accessible community. And I know that we had 2 years of the Main Street closure that were related to COVID. And we had this year. And then moving forward, I just, in terms of the scope of the project, wanted to make sure that that feedback that I had heard was coming to you. This was one way I could do that, but I can also go back to some of those people and tell them to get hold of you.
That'd be great if you could. And
Some aren't around anymore.
sorry?
Some of them aren't around anymore, but yeah.
I heard some feedback as well, but I think that in the cases of the feedback I received, they actually hadn't bothered to go downtown to see that we had doubled the number of handicap parking spaces available adjacent to the Main Street closure. And that was part of the trick, and I would remember on a few occasions sending them copies of the maps because Andy had provided us with a detailed map that showed where all of the moved spaces were. But in, I would say more than 50% of the cases, those folks hadn't bothered to go downtown to actually see that there was space for them. So I don't know if those are the same people you spoke with. Doesn't really matter, but I think we're, as our society changes and ages, we need to sort of keep our finger on the pulse of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for re-raising that. Building Neighborhoods Builds Community 3.0. So this is a continuation of similar work that's been done previously with segments of the community where art's created with an artist and involves the community in doing so. Part of the reason it's a capital project is really to emphasize the draw from the art reserve in order to fund it. When it comes to the interior mural project, that's here at the Civic Center and really represents a refresh of some of the spaces where currently photos that are somewhat dated exist. So you'll see that in the lobby area here.
Okay, if there are no questions on those, we can move into a series of, again, information technology projects that are growth or upgrade related. The first is Town Square. So the current Town Square platform that we use is a on-premises system, and this is moving that to SharePoint Online or in the cloud, which is where this technology is going. features on the on-prem solution are no longer being developed, and so we really will lose some functionality if we're not moving in that direction. But it is a completely different software, and so it's a big project to make that change. We are advancing business registry automation through CityView. So we're really trying to leverage the CityView platform that we have within planning. There's some great links and connections between business registry and planning. Often after developing a building or a site, then you need a business license, right, too. It's kind of the next step in that flow. And so there's some good efficiencies for us to be gained by managing that process through CityView. So that's what that project is all about. Then more broadly on CityView, this really is a partnership between planning with support from IT and continuing to look at how we can improve our use of CityView, how we can gain efficiencies, save time with some of our processes, really maximizing the use of that system. And this allows us to do some upgrades or purchase some additional modules if required. It also allows us to get the experts from CityView here. In fact, we just had a group here this past week shadowing our planners, looking at our process, and then coming back to us with some recommendations. We haven't gotten them yet, but they're coming, about how we might tweak the system to continue to use it to its best and highest capability. So that's really what that's about, and we have that ongoing because we continue to anticipate that type of thing happening. As systems change, we need to look at our processes and then make some adjustments to maximize use of the system. The e-services is a really high-level, broader project looking at how our residents, businesses, taxpayers essentially communicate and work with us electronically. You'll recall we came to council in July for a change of scope on the e-services project to change that to the website platform. So this is just really circling back to that e-services work. The website platform work is continuing, and then we'll have a better understanding of what we can do through the website and where we need to supplement with some additional features. This includes things like being able to access your tax bill online or look at your assessment notice online and finding secure ways to do that. We can't really send some of that information by email because email isn't secure enough for the type of personal information that's included in much of the communication that we have with residents, taxpayers, and so on. IT strategic improvements really is just, again, a little bit of quite a small bucket just to allow us to address things that might come up. At the start of COVID, we used this bucket to help us move from a phone platform to Teams for calling, because that allowed us to work remotely. So really just the kinds of things that might come up again that we haven't been able to anticipate. On the asset management side, this, I think, really is about growth. We currently have a fairly manual process for asset management. You'll recall Pete coming with some of his models in the past. We're lucky that we have such an Excel wizard leading that, but this is really finding a software solution that allows us to more efficiently keep track of our assets and really feeds well into this capital discussion that we're having today and looking at life cycling and anticipated cost of replacement. Some of the work that Whitney was just mentioning about if we delay some of that maintenance work, what might be the impact, what's the short-term saving in changing the work, and really leveraging the information that we have around asset management. And then the final is recreation system enhancement bucket, and really just that same story. There are annual updates that need to happen to our system. That takes time on our end, but also typically requires the vendor to help us with that. There are tweaks that we need to make at times. We used this recently for membership rebates when we were closed during COVID, right? Those are sometimes structural things we have to change around our system, and this allows us the ability to do that. That's the IT bucket in growth and upgrades.
The one capital project and protective services in 2024 municipal enforcement radio upgrades is really an upgrade to the existing radios to allow them to communicate directly with the RCMP. whereas now there's a way to get to the RCMP that's rather slow and represents a game of telephone. In a lot of ways, this is a response to an inquiry, I believe it's the Lazenby inquiry, where a CPO officer was killed in the line of duty, and potentially having a direct line to the RCMP may have aided in that situation.
So just a question, I mean, it's a really small amount. What's the rationale for putting it in 2024 instead of 2023?
My understanding is that there'll be additional work that is happening with the province in 2023 on this, and anticipating that that work might not be complete.
And that work is necessary before we purchase. Thank you.
Okay, so back to me. For growth and upgrade in facilities, we have 3 projects. One is sifting and stabilizing and storing the topsoil stockpile at the new fire hall site. When we started construction at the site, there was far more topsoil on site than we had expected. So it is a significant stockpile right now. We do want to be able to reuse the topsoil, both at the new fire hall when it comes to the landscaping of it, and also for other town projects throughout the community. It does need to be sifted, though, to be able to do that. So this project includes just doing that sifting work and then continuing to store it on site, and then also just stabilizing that stockpile. We did actually look at initially with the stockpile, because there was so much topsoil, just giving it out within the community. The challenge is, because it hasn't been sifted yet, it's not high quality, and even once it's sifted, it's not the kind of high quality that a contractor would go and purchase somewhere else. But we do want to try to keep it in the community. I think there's greenhouse gas benefits, aside from other things, right? So that is our intent, to reuse that topsoil to the extent that we can. So in the meantime, we do have to just manage that stockpile and prepare to keep it intact on site in the same way that we would require other landowners or developers to do with stockpiles on their sites. The repurposing of the fire hall design. So once, and this is the existing fire hall, obviously, but I thought I'd say that. Once the new fire hall is operational, it is in 2023 that we are expecting the fire service to move into that facility, and then we will be turning our eyes, well, we have already been turning our eyes and our minds to what can go into the existing building. Regardless of what goes into that existing building, if it's a municipal department or part of a municipal department, or we rent it out like we rent out many of our other facilities, it will require some renovation, as it was purpose-built to be a fire hall. So this $200,000 in 2023 is really doing that initial design to get an idea of what changes would be necessary to make in the existing fire hall, for it to accommodate the uses that we intend to put in it, and then from there would be a construction budget coming forward to undertake some of that work. But given that it is, there's so much variability to it that it's hard even to put a placeholder in place for this one, because we haven't made a decision yet on what it will be repurposed to. I think Councillor McCallum, you had a question on this.
Yeah, so can you remind me when we expect the new fire hall to be commissioned?
2023. Like in the year? No, I can't. That's off the top of my head.
Spring, okay.
Spring, roughly,
Spring,
but
let's
My
say.
recollection is that we commission the new fire hall, and then we leave the existing fire hall for at least 6 months in case there's any issues or problems. Then we have a place to go back to. That's what I remember in the presentations that we'd received in the past. When will we be going through, when will council see the repurposing sort of policy that administration is bringing forward for all facilities, if I recollect, in advance of deciding what actually goes in that facility?
So we are right now in the midst of the decision framework for use of municipal facilities. I'm hoping it will be done by the end of this year or early next year. And then the existing fire hall would be kind of a test case to go through that, because it's really looking at when we have competing demands for a finite amount of space for like municipal facilities? How do we make decisions around competing department needs? We have a lot of community partners that want space. And even in that sense, what are the lease agreements that we make with some of those community partners? Because I feel like in some ways, some of those agreements and discussions have been relatively informal over the year and then end up in long-term leases. But if it pushes us to a point where as a municipality, our town administration is of a size that we need to be looking for more space, is there sense to leasing out space potentially at a fair amount of money when we have existing municipal space that we're maybe not using as effectively as possible? And even how do we make those decisions between competing uses? Yep. So we want to be able to bring that, complete that end of this year, early next year. And I can't remember if the direction was to bring it back to council or not, but we could certainly bring it to council for information.
I recollect that it was being brought back to council for decision.
Okay.
And that's my expectation. And I think my colleagues would probably agree with me.
Yeah, like I say, off the top of my head, I can't remember what that was, but
Okay,
we'll certainly
yeah.
take a look at it.
It has shifted and changed. Like when we originally were having these conversations, it was about highest and best use in terms of, are we better to sell it?